Hello. Okay. I have a little bit of notes, so it's gonna kind of look like I'm reading off a piece of paper, and it's because I am. Um, but I've decided that I'm gonna do my book reviews of this over a scenario that I created. I'm just gonna say that I am a social worker in kind of like a peer support group, discussing like grief and how to cope with it, some obstacles you might face, et cetera, et cetera. It's basically like the whole rundown on like what grief is, like what to do, what not to do, and stuff like that. And I kind of wanted to do like maybe an interactive approach, more like a group discussion slash book club kind of thing, if that makes sense. Um, so the first book that I got, this is going to be aimed towards kind of a younger audience. It could be used for like really young preteen area, but I would probably focus it more on like elementary level kiddos. So I got this book title. It's The Good Egg, and it's by Jory John and Pete Oswald. And basically, this book is about an egg who is trying to be good in his carton, per se. Um, he ends up getting really stressed out by being good in his carton, but leaves his carton and basically tries to find himself, developing coping skills. And then at the end of the day, he realizes he misses his family and friends. So I thought this could tie into like the grief, because my other books, and I'll get into that, is about grief of losing a loved one. And so without it being too heavy on my younger audience, like it discusses a lot of coping skills that you can use. Hold on, let me find the page. Okay, here it is. So it says like he took some walks, he started reading, journaling, painting, swimming, and then like I said, at the end he realizes that he needs his family and friends. And I thought this tied into grief because obviously the coping skills, like what you can do, and honestly in a real life scenario someone might catch themselves drifting away from their loved ones in a time that they need the most. And at the end of this book, like I said, he goes back to the carton because he realizes he needs his friends and everything. So I thought that would be good because it also just shows the readers that in order to heal, you need not only do some self-care, but you also need to surround yourself with family and friends. And I think that's a really good step in like a grieving process. So like I said, I think it's gonna be for a younger audience because, like I said, it's a picture book and it's like all fun and crazy, colorful pictures and stuff. So I literally think like they would take a lot of interest in the book as well. Obviously, the characters are not realistic. And yes, they are in a positive manner. It shows in a positive manner. The book might show a little bit of diversity. It doesn't like actually focus on diversity, but like if you look at some photos like this, it has like different color of eggs and everything. So yeah, and like I said, I thought kind of wanted it to do like a group setting. We can like discuss okay, what coping skills have you learned from this book, what's the main theme of the book, just stuff like that. And yeah, and I think this book really encourages like the audience to interact, have a discussion, and I think that the audience could get a really good message out of this book. So like I said, younger audience as well. And so my second book, this is gonna be for like not like adolescents per se, but like maybe kind of like I said, preteen, middle school, I guess, if you want to call it that. And this book is called A Monster Calls. It's a novel by Patrick Ness, and it's illustrated by Jim Kay. And let me pull up my note real fast. So basically, this is about a 13-year-old boy who is dealing with his mother's illness, and she does end up dying in the book. So that's a little bit of a trigger warning, and that would probably be addressed like beforehand, and people would have the option, like the group members would have the option to like, not be a part of it if they aren't feeling comfortable. And basically, throughout this book, her death is like hanging over his head, basically. And so Connor, the main character, like is like exploring his emotions throughout the stories, and to find peace and in her passing and how he feels about it. And I noticed a lot of this book, his mom is dying of cancer, and Connor blames himself for it. And I think that's very, common in a grieving process, no matter how a loved one died or anything like that. I think people do typically tend to blame themselves sometimes. And so this book, like I said, kind of shows the audience like Connor figuring out that it's not his fault, and they also, the main message is him like letting her go, realizing it's not his fault, and just going through the grieving process and everything. And there is a little bit of imagery in this book, not a lot. Like I said, it's just like some really dark pictures like this, and that's why I don't think it would be good for a younger audience per se. Like I said, maybe like middle school, but it is a picture book, so I don't think like maybe full on like high school students would enjoy it. But like it can get a little dark and scary. I don't think it was very hard reading it. So not only could I read this like in a group setting, like, from session to session, like a chapter a day or something like that, I could also like send them home with it, because like I said, the reading level's really not that advanced. And like I said, the only trigger warnings, like I said, would be like, death. And I think that's a reality that grieving people do have to face. So like I said, I think this discussion would basically be about walking through the grieving process. And also I think like just sharing this story also would give the students courage to share their grieving process. Do they blame themselves, and it also shows the steps that Connor takes in order to get out of that little phase, because at the end he really does realize it's not his fault, and he does end up getting at peace with it, if that makes sense. Like I said, the grade level, middle school, preteen, and I do think they would understand the concepts of this book, especially if I was reading out aloud to it, and if there was like a question or something that came up, we would like stop and have a discussion about it. And let's see here, the characters are realistic, they're not cartoonish, I guess, if that makes sense. There's not really a whole lot of diversity. Well, there is actually, because Connor, the mother who's dying of cancer, is a single mother, and they are extremely poor because, like I said, she's a single mother and she's also battling cancer and everything. So you can also show a little bit of the poverty side to it, and it also can relate to people who have single parents, and like a absent mother or father, because in this book the father's pretty absent in his life. And yeah, I think this would be a really good discussion thing, because after I read it, I instantly like watched the movie and everything, and I really, really, really enjoyed this book. And I honestly do think like the author's message, does encourage like the students to want to like reflect and engage in all this discussion and everything. And it's pretty open-minded too, because we can have a lot of discussions based off of this book. So yeah, and like I said, the only thing I would address before like I mentioned this book would be like trigger warning, and give people the option if they wanted to or not. And then my next book, I wouldn't call it children's literature, so I might be breaking the rules just a little bit, but I kind of wanted to focus on each age group. So I started out with elementary, and I started out with middle school, and then I went up to middle school. And so this is what I would probably show my adolescent, teenagers, young adults, whoever are struggling with grief and everything. So this is called Playlist for the Dead by Michelle, I don't know how to pronounce that name, Volkov. So basically this book has a lot of trigger warnings. Like I said, there's some cussing, there's suicide. So I would definitely warn my kiddos before I read this book. And I think this would be the type of book where I would read like a chapter a day and then reflect in discussion afterwards. So basically this book is about a boy named Sam, and his best friend Hayden ended up committing suicide. And it kind of gives me 13 Reasons Why vibes, because his best friend Hayden left him a playlist, and it was basically his suicide note, a playlist was. And so throughout this entire book, it really shows the grieving process and how much Sam is struggling with his best friend being gone. And that's reality, because I bet a lot of people in this group that I'm talking about are struggling with, the death of a loved one. And that's what this book really, 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 really does focus on. But Sam can't figure out why his best friend committed suicide, and he ends up hurting himself, not like physically, but like emotionally hurting himself, and his relationships with his family and friends start to deteriorate because he's so focused on why his friend committed suicide. And then at the end, he basically forgets about it. Like, he throws the playlist away because throughout the entire thing, he's just focused on the playlist. He wants to know why and what happened. And like I said, he ends up blaming himself. And like I said, at the end, he realizes what's done is done. And the only thing I can do is to get help, grieve appropriately with a lot of coping skills, and move on. So, yeah, and that's kind of what this one's about. And like I said, trigger warning, this does have cussing and suicide and everything, but it is one of my favorite books. Definitely a tearjerker too. There's no pictures in it. And like I said, this is why I would probably focus on like high school, adolescents, young adults. And I do think, especially if they are in the grieving process, they could understand the concepts that are in this book, and I would love to like have a discussion based off of this, maybe the what to do and what not to do, like I'll be like, for example, I'll be like, okay, what is Sam doing in here? Is this appropriate? Is this not? Is this good for his mental health? Is it not? There's a lot of discussions that can come out of this book. And it also, like I said, encourages the students to engage in a lot of discussions and everything. And I think this would provide hope for students, because like I said, it starts out with him finding his friend, his grieving process, and how he didn't do it well. And then at the end, he finally has hope, and he figures out the right course for him. He gets a therapist, and then he ends up forgetting everything, but he also never forgets his best friend. But then he realized that he was losing his mental health trying to figure it out. So yeah, that would be my 3 books. So The Good Egg for an elementary audience, A Monster Calls for like a middle school preteen audience, and Playlist for the Dead for a high school and young adult audience. Alrighty, thank you.